Welcome to the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast, brought to you by GuitarZoom.com. If you want to improve your guitar playing, keep listening. If you want to improve even faster, go to GuitarZoom.com, where you'll find all of Steve's premium courses, masterclasses, and memberships that'll help you quickly and easily improve your playing. Now here's your host, Steve Stine.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started then. So if you have your guitar available, great. If you don't, you can always watch this later. We're going to go through a bunch of this stuff. I'm going to compare what we did with major and minor pentatonic to modes, if you know anything about modes. Now, today's discussion is going to be a little bit more involved than what we normally have, but I'm going to try and make it as easy as possible for everybody. So even if you don't understand modes, maybe you'll understand where I'm coming from and how you can use this a little bit in your playing as well, okay? So if you remember what we talked about before, was we talked about how we could take either minor or major pentatonic, and we could play, let's say we're in the key of A, and we're doing 12-bar blues using A7, and D7, and E7. And that's our 12-bar blues chord progression, and we're going to solo over the top of that, or we're going to create a melody over the top of that. So we could use A minor pentatonic, or we could use A major pentatonic. To solo over the top of that. And then when we go to the D chord, the 4 chord, remember we talked about how you could continue just using A major and minor pentatonic. Over the E, you could continue using A major, A minor pentatonic. Or you could call what I call parallel soloing, which is when it goes to D, you move, I shouldn't say move, you switch to the D major or D minor pentatonic, right? We talked about how parallel means we could take all of the ideas we're doing in A minor or A major pentatonic, we could move it up to D. So when the D chord starts, we could look at D on the 6th string here and play D minor pentatonic. Or D major pentatonic. Right? So we just parallel, we just took all the ideas from A minor and A major, and we just moved up to D, and we did the same thing. And then we can move up to E and do the exact same thing. We can move up and do the same thing over the E, right? So we're just following the chords around. Chord chasing is what I call it. Okay. Let's do that same idea. Oh, before we do that, one more recap, just to make sure we're all on the same page and this makes sense to everybody, okay? Then we talked about how we could take those same ideas of using A, D, and E, and we could put them all into one position on the guitar, so we don't have to move around if we didn't want to. We could play A minor down here, and then we could play D minor down here in the same position, right? And then the E, we could play in that same position or just move up here. And then back to A. So I can move around in that parallel sense visually of moving across the fretboard, staying in that A minor first position pentatonic, right, or whatever you're using. Or I could combine them all together. So that's the summary of what we're going to be talking about today, but we're going to convert this into a modal perspective, okay? Catherine is here, Sangam is here, Clayt is here. Let's see. Just making sure I say hi to a few people. Jimmy, Michael, China 2 o'clock learning blues. Very cool. Eugene, Ray is here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay. So again, this is going to get a little heady here, and I apologize. I'm not trying to talk over anybody's head, so I'm going to try and make it as easy as I can. So when we talk about playing blues, okay, and we combine major and minor pentatonic like we talked about, the major mode, and again, don't get hung up on modes, okay? Because I even had to do this, okay? Don't get hung up on modes. If you don't know modes, just follow along as best you can. But really, what I'm doing is I'm taking a major scale, but what I'm going to do is take that 7th note of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? I'm going to take the 7th note, I'm going to lower it down. And when we do that, when we take the major scale and we lower the 7th note, a half step, we call it mixolydian. Mixolydian is a big fancy word for major with the 7th lowered. Think of it that way, okay? Now, mixolydian, because it's got that lowered 7th, remember, one of the big things we've talked about over these last 8 lessons is, or these live sessions, is how the 7th, that minor 7th, that whole step back from the root, how it makes it sound very bluesy. Well, when we play mixolydian, we're playing major, but we're adding in that lowered 7th, so we get that bluesy kind of sound. Now, if I just sit and play like this, and this is what I warned you a long time ago in these sessions about, is that when you think of things in terms of modes, what happens oftentimes is that it doesn't sound bluesy anymore, because when you start going, it doesn't really sound like blues. You still got to add those inflections, all these things that we've talked about before. So if I'm playing and I go, I could play that mixolydian, which again is just major with that lowered 7th degree, right? But I'm thinking of it more in terms of the pentatonic things, like the bending and all those things that we've talked about that I can do. But I'm incorporating it, wrapping it around this mixolydian, okay? So let me just show you something. Even if you don't know what mixolydian is, let me show you something. Okay, so we're going to take this scale, and again, I'm playing A, B, C sharp. Let me just go through the frets. It might be easier if you got your guitar with and you don't know all the notes. So I'm playing 5, 7, 4, 5, 7, 4, 5, 7. Okay, that's what I'm playing. And then I could keep going here and play 4, 6, 7, 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, 9, if you come back to this lesson later to kind of learn this. Again, we're not here to learn modes. That's a whole other topic of conversation. Okay? But let's say, for instance, instead of just playing it like mixolydian, we want to incorporate the notes of mixolydian with the sound of the blues. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add back in that minor to major twist that we talked about before. Okay? So let me show you this right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to outline the notes of the A7 chord using the mixolydian. So I'm going to play A, which is the 5th fret, C sharp, which is the 4th fret of the next string, E, which is the 7th fret of this string, and then I'm going to head over here and I'm going to go to the 5th fret. So I'm playing the root, 3rd, 5th, and then that 7th, that minor 7th that makes it sound bluesy. Okay? And then I'm just going to do the octave of that again. So I'm going to play 7th fret of the 4th string, 6th fret, 5th fret, and then 8th fret. That's my 7th. See how those are octaves? And then I end playing the root and 3rd again on this string, which is 5 and 9. So for those of you that don't know all your notes, let me just carve it out in frets. You can write it down or watch this later. So I'm playing 5, 4, 7, 5, 7, 6, 5, 8, 5, 9. And all I'm doing right there is playing the notes of the chord of A7, the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and then the minor 7th, which creates an A7 chord. And if you don't know that, that's fine. Now you do, right? So that's what I'm doing. Now when I do that, all of a sudden it matches a little bit better with the sound of the blues as opposed to just going. Okay? So what I might do is I might start trying to approach soloing using... Yeah, Paul, we've been talking about all kinds of different things, and as I started off this saying, is that this class right now is going to be a little bit more advanced, right? We're bumping up here, so this is modes. I've had a bunch of people asking about modes, so we're going to do that. Okay? The blue note is, I'm not playing the blue note at all right now, Doug. Okay? So I'm just taking that arpeggio that I just outlined. Arpeggio means broken chord. I'm just playing the notes of the chord separately. That's what an arpeggio is. And I'm just laying them out across the fretboard. Okay? So again, I'm playing 5, 4, 7, 5, 7, 6, 5, 8, 5, 9. And when I do that, all I'm doing is playing the same arpeggio twice. And then 2.5 times technically. Okay, so here's my point though. If I took all of this stuff that I'm showing you right now and I played it in a parallel sense, just like we did with pentatonic, when the D chord comes up, I could take everything that I'm showing you right now and I could move it up to the 10th fret. The whole entire thing. So whether you're seeing, here's D7, here's the 4 chord, right? So if you might be seeing D mixolydian like this, which is the major with the flatted 7 or the lowered 7, right? That we first talked about. Well, that's going to work just fine over this D. Okay? Or maybe you're seeing this arpeggio I just showed you. And then guess what? When the E chord comes, of course, you can parallel. You can just move it up again and do the exact same thing over that E. See that? Okay? So if you've got certain licks that work, like you're watching this video again maybe, and you look at what I did and you go, wow, I really like the sound of that, right? So you watch it a couple times. Well, here comes the D chord. I can move up. Or the E chord. You see what I'm doing? So I'm just taking the idea of the A mixolydian, and again, it's not just playing the scale. That's the thing I want you to understand. I don't want to get too far off in the weeds with this, but learning modes is a chore into itself, and I'm sure there's people here that could agree with me and tell you that. Learning about modes is a theoretical thing that takes a lot of time. And right now, I'm not trying to sell you on modes. There was a lot of people asking about modes, so I wanted to show you kind of how this works. Now, in your mind, it doesn't matter whether you're seeing it as major and minor together, pentatonic, or if you're seeing it as modes, because you're going to get the same effect anyway as long as you're listening to what it sounds like. Okay? I've always tried to tell people that when it comes to scales in my fretboard and things like that, I try not to see everything one-dimensionally, like everything attached to everything else. I like the fact that there's layers, because when there's layers, I can move like on Shrek, right? So when there's layers, I can move between these things and get different sounds. If I just try and streamline everything, then the problem is that every time I play, everything just sounds exactly the same, whether I'm playing pentatonic or diatonic or whatever kind of combination of things I'm thinking about. That's the problem with that for me. Doesn't mean it's the same for everybody else. But I like to have different, almost like 3D things that I can see on the guitar that I can play, because then my phrasing changes, my approach changes, and therefore the sound of what I'm doing hopefully changes. Okay? So if that kind of makes sense, that's what we're doing here. So whether or not you're seeing it as major and minor pentatonic, or whether or not you're seeing it as, for instance, mixolydian, which is major with this lowered 7. Now, the walk away from here, if you've never done any of this, is I don't care whether you play this. Okay, that's not what I want you to do. What I want you to see is this. That's what I want you to see, okay? Because if you can visualize that arpeggio again, that A7 arpeggio, over the top of your pentatonic, that's another layer. You see? So you could drop into this and then drop down into your minor pentatonic, maybe add your turnaround, your minor major. Somebody asked about the blues note. Heck, we can throw that in there. Right? All this stuff is existing all in the same place. Okay? Let me see if I can answer this question. I just saw a question pop up. Again, Facebook user, it says, but you didn't put your name, so I'm not sure who you are. Got the new course, love it. One question, you say you can solo major over the 4 chord. the example is in A, and you show the C of the 7th of D. That is the 3rd of the tonic A. Wouldn't that convert to the scale back to minor? But the A minor scale was there to begin with, though, right? If I'm understanding you correctly, you're right. But when you played A minor pentatonic, you were playing C anyway over the A major, right? That's why we added in the C sharp. You see? So remember, just to kind of answer your question, I think, what you have to do is which is what we've been talking about this entire time, but when you go to the D chord, when you shift to the D chord, there's one of two things that's happening. Either you're still in the world of A, but you're accentuating something to do with the D, or you're moving to the world of D and forgetting about the world of A until A comes back, if that makes sense. They're two very different approaches, and they both work great. Okay? And for those of you that are, maybe studying your theory and things like that, here's the kicker of all this stuff. There is no logical theory out there that allows you to have an A7, a D7, and an E7 all within the same key in a logical sense. Okay? There's no key that will allow you to have three seventh chords within the same key. So blues in itself doesn't make sense logically. If you were just to grab a theory book and start reading it, blues doesn't make sense because you'll never get an A7, a D7, and an E7 all in the same key logically. So what I always tell people to understand is that blues already is illogical, and I always call it the theory of rock and roll. Okay, not everything makes sense, and not that music, even if we go back to classical times, it's not like everything always made sense anyway. But with blues, what you're really doing is focusing on the sound and the feel, the vibe, right? That's, as we started moving from certainly in the 1800s with Romanticism, even in books, Frankenstein, all this kind of stuff, people were moving away from just logic and dealing more with creativity and emotion on top of things that were logical, if that sort of makes sense. So when we moved into, big band music and jazz and all of these things that led into, what we consider kind of modern day blues, that's what was happening, is there was this transition. That's why when I teach, and again, I'm not trying to get way out there with you, but that's why when I teach, I like to not just go, here's some scales you should use for blues. Because if you don't play them right, they're not going to sound bluesy. They're just going to sound like you're playing scales, right? That's what you have to be careful of. So that's why if you look at the fretboard as minor pentatonic with major added on, you're going to get more of that. Well, jazz blues is this, only we would add more chromaticism into what it is that we're doing. Okay? If we started adding in, we'd get a bit more jazz if we started adding in a bit of that chromaticism in there, Fausto asked. Okay? So if that makes sense, now what I'm doing is I'm just taking this can of soup right here, and I can see it says chicken noodle. And all I'm doing is I'm turning it around, and now I'm reading the ingredients, which is still the chicken noodle soup, but it's more in depth. That's what modes are doing. Okay? So as I'm showing you this, again, if you are someone who's studying modes, you might be going, oh, that's really interesting. If you're not studying modes, it's okay. You can just go, oh, I see what he's doing. I don't understand the modes, but I can see how what I'm doing right there is I'm really trying to separate, so I'm not playing major and minor with bluesy things, although I'm most certainly going to bring those back in. I need them. But if I think about this in terms of layers, right, I can come down here and do some of this minor or major or both, or I could pop up here and do some of this Mixolydian. Okay? So I'm just reading some of your things here. Okay, so hopefully that's kind of making sense to you. So again, another parallel idea of being able to take your A chord and add in, and then maybe D comes up, and you come up and you, and then A comes up. Now maybe I'm going to go back. Now I'm just doing a minor thing, right? See the contrast? So I don't feel bad. My conscience doesn't fight with itself that, oh no, you got to play Mixolydian. Oh, you got to do. It isn't that. It's all about the levels, the layers, and moving between those to get different sounds. This is why the misconception people have is pentatonic for beginners, diatonic or modes for advanced people. I don't believe that. I don't think of it that way. Although, needless to say, the more that you learn and the more you understand, the more you can utilize the things that you learn, right? So for me, just because I learn modes doesn't mean there's no such thing as pentatonic, and pentatonic is for kids, and that couldn't be further from the truth. You know, every good guitar player you know still utilizes pentatonic. It's just they do things on top of it as well. Well, you're doing things on top of pentatonic as well, simply by combining major and minor pentatonic together, or adding the minor to major twist, or adding the blues note. You're already adding things that are above the standard pentatonic. And even in saying that, there's nothing wrong with the standard pentatonic either. It's just that if you're one-dimensional, if you only have one layer, that's all you have to work with. We only know what we know, right? Or we don't know what we don't know, right? However you want to look at that. So if we only have that one level, that one station, if you will, that's all we can work with. So the point of all of this is to give you other things. It doesn't mean you need it all, because sometimes when you try and hoard, the problem is you wind up losing everything, because you try and learn too much at once, or you try and absorb too much information, and believe me, I've done it a million times. You wind up with nothing, because it all just flies out the window, and you don't absorb any of it, like we've talked about before. The trick with any of this stuff is just to absorb it, okay? Let's see here. Fausto says, yes, of course, if you land on the third of dominant chord, it sounds pleasant. That's right. Okay, so if you've been with me so far, I'm not going to recap because I don't want to bore everybody with this, but I'm going to take it just one level higher for those people that are studying modes. And I'm going to try and do this fairly quick because I don't want to bore anybody, okay? But there's something really cool that you should think about. So if I'm playing in A Mixolydian over A, and D Mixolydian over D, and E Mixolydian over E, what that really means is that if I came down here into A, I could play an A Mixolydian over A, and when it goes to D Mixolydian, yes, I'm in D Mixolydian, okay? But if I'm in D Mixolydian, let's think about it. I'm really in, if you know your modes, I'm really in A Dorian, if I was to relate it back to A. So when I go to D Mixolydian, I'm really in G major, which gives us A Dorian. So when the D chord comes up, when the D7 comes up, you could solo in Dorian, and it would sound great. Because D Mixolydian is A Dorian, is G major. Now, if you don't know your modes, don't worry about it. I'm just talking gibberish, and it doesn't matter. I'm just telling you if you've memorized some of this stuff before. If you play E Mixolydian, you're really in A major, A Ionian, A major, okay? So E Mixolydian would be A major. You could stay in A major, okay? Yeah, and it's okay if you don't know. That's what I just said. If you don't know this stuff, don't worry about it. But there are people on this live session that do understand these things. That's why I don't want to take way too much time with it. I just want to throw it out there. So for those of you that are studying some of this stuff, you can go, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. I get that, okay? Now, if you're in, now again, A, I'm playing A Mixolydian. D, I'm playing D Mixolydian, which is really A Dorian. Now, that doesn't mean I want to just go and play A Dorian. I still want to outline the chord. I still want to use elements. But I can make it sound a little more Dorian. And then when the A comes up, I'd go back to A Mixolydian. You see? And you do the same thing over major. So again, I just want to throw that out there. I don't want to make a big deal out of it because I don't want people to get confused, okay? Let's see here. did Steve by chance mention modal patterns? No, that's a whole nother conversation. And right now we're just trying to focus on blues, and I'm trying to expand your thought process creatively on how to expand that. I don't want to get into patterns and things on the fretboard. Not that that's not important. It's incredibly important. It's just that would not be our conversation. So I'm speaking to just me. That's definitely something that you should practice if you need. And I appreciate your mentioning that, because it is very, 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 very important. But we don't want to get too far off the beaten track here, or we're going to get lost, and then people are going to go, I don't know what's happening here. So let's see here. Michael Good says, spent months learning modes, and it was well worth the effort. Awesome. Let's see here. Paul says, once I understand the degrees of the scale, I understood what modes are. Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And remember, Paul, it doesn't end with understanding. That's always the most important thing I try and explain to people. Your ability to play this instrument isn't built on your understanding. We're humans. We're wired by nature to do math and to do science and to do, to read and spell and all these things. That doesn't give us the capability, each and every one of us, to write a good novel or to become a scientist, or, right? So the education of information is important, but the application of that information is equally, if not more important. Always remember that for the rest of your life. I will go to my grave swearing by that, okay? I would rather have you, take this with a grain of salt, I would rather have you understand very little of what you're doing, but create great music. Now, the truth is, they have to go hand in hand to a certain degree, because that's oftentimes an excuse for people. They'll go, well, I don't understand anything. I just play by feel. Okay, but if you're stuck on a level or a layer, you only have so much Give me 1 second. I think my heater is going to kick in, so you're going to have to deal with that for just a second here. Well, for a few minutes, but if it does kick in. Anyway, so if that makes sense, the information that you learn has to be applied musically to what you're doing, okay? So for me, there's a balance between the two. If you know very little and you're saying, I don't need any information, I don't need to learn anything, I just play by feel, I guarantee you that a little bit of logic will get you to the next level. A little bit of understanding music is going to get you to the next level. If you're over here and you're saying, I understand a lot about theory, but I can't make my music sound like music, a little bit of creativity is going to be good. So there's always got to be a balance between those two things, if that makes sense, okay? Quickly, let's see here. Just play the A Dorian 3 notes per string, okay? A Dorian 3 notes per string would look like this. I'd play 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, and that would be my scale, although I could play 9 on the next string. Right? So if I was playing over here, if I want Dorian, though, remember, I got to raise that note, right? Because I've got to raise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for Dorian, so I got to raise this up. So I'd get 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, 9, right? That's what we get for Dorian. And then we've got the minor 7 there. So if you play the entire thing, here's what you'd be doing. You'd be playing 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, 9, 5, 7, 9, 5, 7, 9, 7, 8, 10, 7, 8, 10. That would be the whole thing. Again, you're from the Facebook group. You didn't put your name, so I didn't see what that was. Let's see here. Just trying to kind of get up here. And thank you for those of you that are answering some questions. I really appreciate that, because there's way too many questions for me to get to. So I appreciate your joining in and helping with that. So staying in A changes modes with different moods with every other chord. Well, that's an easy way of saying it, but because again, just because here's something that I remember hearing Joe Satriani saying a long time ago, just so I don't get off the beaten track here. But soloing, practicing scales and theory and all these things without a chord progression underneath you is really kind of pointless from a creative standpoint, from a musical standpoint. It could be great for technique, all these different kinds of things. But unless you're playing over an actual chord progression, you're missing the thread that makes this musical connection between the two, melody and harmony, all of these things that are happening, right? So when you're practicing or when you're soloing, if the chords are changing underneath you, let's just use a Jack. I'm going to just use a hypothetical because I don't know if this is what you're asking, but let's say you're playing we're going to strip it all the way back. You're playing an A minor pentatonic the entire time over A, D, and E. And while you're playing A minor pentatonic the entire time over those three chords, all you're ever emphasizing or landing on, or emphasizing is the best word I can use, is A over everything. Will it work? Yes, it will. But the problem is that it's going to get really old really fast to a listener because there's nothing happening. It's one layer. It's one dimension. So the next logical thing that you do is you start going, oh, okay, well, maybe over A, I'll emphasize A, and over D, I'll emphasize D, and over E, I emphasize E. Okay, that's the next level. That's another thing, and it's going to give another kind of dimension to your playing. When you are in a key, like A major, which is what you're asking, and the D chord comes up and you change the notes that you're emphasizing, that's essentially what modes are, if they're all lumped into the same thing. Now, again, that's a big generalization, but the thing about modes are, when we talk about Ionian and Dorian and Phrygian and all these things, the misconception people have is you have to move across the floor or across the fretboard. Here's Ionian, and here's Dorian, and here's Phrygian, and here's the Mixolydian. No. Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, they all exist right here. It's just, what are you emphasizing? Yes, you can move positions, just like pentatonic has positions. We don't label each one of the pentatonic, pentatonic position number 1 is called French fry. Pentatonic position number 2 is called whatever, right? We don't label them. We just understand that, oh, I'm just moving up, but I'm playing the same notes just in a different shape, right? Diatonic is no different, or modes are no different. So if I learn, how to play G major, G Ionian, well, I can play that anywhere I want. If I come up here, I can play anywhere I want. As I move up, I'm not now in Mixolydian and Aeolian and Locrian, and I'm not in those unless I'm emphasizing something and the chords underneath are reflecting that. They're just positions as I move around. So in my brain, the notes that I'm going to emphasize relative to the chords are shifting, regardless of whether I stay here or move around. I hope that kind of answers your question. Okay? Let's see here. Can you talk about how modes affect the chord qualities of the major scale? No, because we're going to get too far off in the weeds. I don't want to make this all about modes. We could have a modes conversation sometime. Maybe what we'll do is have a session like this on modes. But I don't want to get way too far off on that because we're still kind of in the blues world right now, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. My knees hurt says, my issue is my ears hate me. That's great. All right, let's see here. Well, I think we're pretty good. Remember, if you get a chance, click on the link. Someone from GuitarZoom is going to throw a link in there for you to check out Creative Blues Soloing. See if it's something that can help you if you're trying to break out of some of these ruts, okay? If you feel like you need to study more theory, I have a couple of guitar courses through GuitarZoom that discuss music theory. Music theory is a long conversation. It's not something you can just get done in an hour. I can give you shortcuts, and if you go on YouTube, if you look up Steve Stine modes, you'll find there's like an hour-long discussion that I did that's got, 500,000 views or something like that, maybe more at this point. I don't even pay attention anymore, but it's a great entry-level conversation. It doesn't include everything that you need to know about modes and get you to the kind of the upper echelon of really getting modes, but it's a great little entry-level thing, and it doesn't cost you a penny. Right? But if you want to move on from there, we have like, I don't know if Derek's on this, Modes Made Easy, or if that's still available, or if that's just in the membership. And then we have like the Modes Masterclass, which is another really great one to look at if you really want to study modes. That Modes Masterclass is pretty deep. But just letting you know that those things are, there's other things too. So I want to stay in the realm of blues. I don't want to lose everybody by talking too much about those sorts of things. So coming back, okay, to this idea is that what we're doing is we're taking, now we have the options of using minor pentatonic across everybody, major pentatonic A minor pentatonic across all three of these chord changes, A major pentatonic across all of these. Then we have the ability to play major and minor, not at the same time, just moving back and forth between major and minor. We can do this anytime we want over these three chords. Then we've got combining major and minor pentatonic together, which was a key element that we talked about in one of these live sessions. Then we talked about parallel, how we can take any of these ideas but then move them. A, you do the A things, major, minor, together. D, you do the D things, major, minor, together. E, you do the same thing, okay? Now what we've done is we've kind of upped that level by looking at this thing we call Mixolydian and going, hey, we can play Mixolydian and move that as well. And for those of you that are kind of modal knowledge, when you do that, what you're really doing is A Mixolydian is A Mixolydian. D Mixolydian is A Dorian. And E Mixolydian is A major. So that way you can kind of get a bigger, larger perspective of the entire thing. So notice how today one of the big things that we did was we just created an arpeggio. Okay? It's a great sounding, it's nothing fancy, just... But when you play that idea and you combine it then, now right there, maybe I'll drop back, and then I'll come back into that arpeggio again. So I can move back and forth between all of these different things. Now, one thing that I used to recommend to students all the time was this conversation that we're having, don't try and retain, you know, one of the things that drives me nuts is when you go to a restaurant and the waiter or the waitress is not allowed to have a pencil and a piece of paper to write down your meal. Right? So you have certain things that you want, you know, no mayonnaise. I try not to eat all that kind of stuff. So all these different things, but they are trying to remember everything. And you're in a party of 7, right? And they're trying to remember everything. And when the meal comes, there's a bunch of stuff that's wrong because they're trying to remember it all, right? As opposed to, for whatever reason, maybe they don't want to have the pencil and paper. Maybe their boss won't allow them to. I have no idea, okay? But that's the same thing of what we're talking about right now. I used to tell students, write down ideas, write down thoughts, write down concepts on a piece of paper. And then when you go to solo or when you go to practice, look at that piece of paper and go, oh yeah, I can go to D and do this. Or, oh, we can call it chord chasing. You might just write chord chasing. Oh, so when I go here, I'm going to do this. Oh, I forgot I could do major or minor, right? Whatever it might be, but you write it on a piece of paper and you set it in front of you when you're practicing, maybe on your music stand or whatever. And then you just look at it and go, okay, I'm going to try that, right? And again, this is where we talked about jam tracks. The beauty of a jam track is you can go, okay, for the next 4 minutes, I'm not going to try and make the most exciting solo in the world. I'm going to focus on Mixolydian, chasing, or I'm going to focus on using the minor to major twist, or I'm going to focus on whatever. And that's what you focus on. It's not how well can I solo, can I be a rock star for 5 minutes? It's what can I focus on for the next X amount of minutes and try and develop. And if it doesn't work, I stop, try it again, stop, try it again, stop, try it again, rewind the track, start, you know, that sort of thing, as opposed to everything has to exist in my brain at once and I have to make this work. Sometimes that doesn't work. You know what I mean? So just kind of think about those things a little bit. I got to scroll to the end. There's so many comments, and I apologize. I just won't get to everything because it's just, I said no mayonnaise, that's right. Yeah, and Hammerstrom says, I am so glad I never learned theory. Maybe that'll work for you. Theory for me changed my life. Theory was a life-changing experience for me. But I had already been playing for a long time before I learned theory, at least a number of years before I learned theory. So I already learned how to do things, but theory really expanded my abilities to get creative. And everybody's different, so I'm not going to sit and preach yay or nay. I'm just saying that it's easy to convince yourself you don't need theory, and it's easy to convince yourself that if you know a lot of theory, you can play music. And neither one of these things are necessarily true. There's got to be a middle ground where you're trying to utilize these things. And that's something I guess I'll kind of end this with, and then I'll stop preaching to you. But the most important thing isn't what everybody else thinks of your playing. It's what you think of your playing, okay? I've always been an overachiever. I know, you might not believe that. But I've always been an overachiever, always. So it's always been about, in my mind, that's not good enough. I don't like that. I need to fix that. And it's not because I'm trying to pretend like I'm something I'm not, and I'm talking about me. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about me. It's about finding an authentic place where when I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm satisfied. I never listen to myself and go, oh my God, wow, that was the greatest thing I've ever. I never do that. But there are many times that I can listen and go, yeah, that's going to work. When I was younger, that never happened. I was always disappointed in my playing. I was always disappointed in the way I played. And it wasn't because, you know, for me, I never wanted to build a little cave and then live in that cave and then, just be scared of, one of the things that used to drive everybody that I knew crazy was I never said no to opportunities. It didn't matter it didn't matter if I didn't sleep for 2 days, right? I would practice and I would play and I would learn and I would study and I would teach and I was always going, almost to the point that it kind of drove me crazy because I was just always so busy. But I always thought, man, if I say no to something, that could have been a really great opportunity for me to whatever, right? So I just kept going. And that's how I absorbed a lot of information. Some of it was theory-based. Some of it had nothing to do with theory. But the beauty is because I kept forcing myself into situations, musical situations, to do different things, I had to practice all the time. And I had to play all the time, and I had to learn new stuff all the time. And so just be careful that you don't convince yourself of something that isn't true. And also, don't convince yourself that everybody else's opinion you have to take. Sometimes, yes, but not everything, okay? So anyway, kind of think about that when you're going, okay? So everybody take care, stay positive. Hopefully this helped you a little bit. Do me a big favor and, check out Creative Blue Soloing, see if it's something that you're interested in. Obviously, subscribe to the YouTube or Facebook channels or whatever. Share, any information that you get. It's how I make my living, so if you, spread the word, I can keep doing what I'm doing, and I thank you very much for being here, and I am blessed that you listened to me, and hopefully you learned something and keep staying motivated to practice. So, all right, so everybody take care, stay positive, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll be back for sure on Monday. Same time, same bat channel, okay? I'm not sure if we're going to keep going with any after that, but for sure Monday will be one. So if you have a chance, join me on Monday. I'll probably not do a Monday guitar motivation since I'm doing one of these. Our Monday motivation will be this, okay? So if you normally join me for that, all right? So take care, everybody. Stay positive. Next time on the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast. Okay, well, today what we're going to do is we're just, again, expanding what we talked about last time. I know in the last session we went into modes a little bit, and I know that's a little confusing for people, and so that's why I only dipped my toe into it a little bit just to kind of explain to you how we could use that. And again, if you've missed any of these live sessions that I've done, please go back and watch them because there's just a ton of information. So each one that we're doing, I'm just kind of stacking on to the last one that we did. And so today what I thought is I would talk to you a little bit about chord tones versus non-chord tones, basically melodic soloing. So trying to give your solos a purpose, a direction to go. We've talked about phrasing, and we've talked about all the different ways you can use major and minor and pentatonic and, again, modes and parallel movement that we've talked about before, where I play in A and then I play in D and I play in E, all of these different kinds of things. And so what I want to do today to kind of top off this whole thing is just make sure that you understand that between choosing the scale that you have, thinking about your phrasing, which we've talked about, and landing on the right notes at the right time really can get you a long way. And then you add in the flavor of, licks or patterns or something that you might have, and you can just elevate it that much more. But this part of landing on the right notes at the right time is really crucial. Now, when I say that, I use the word emphasis. So emphasis to me is just you're trying to make some notes sound more important than something else, right? So if you're creating a thematic melody, something that you want it to, resonate in somebody's brain, you really need to use the same notes, even though the chords might be changing, right? If you enjoyed today's podcast and want to learn guitar even faster, go to guitarzoom.com and click the Get Started button to get access to courses that are right for your interest and skill level. Again, go to guitarzoom.com and click the Get Started button.